But the thing in the long run, and that's not too long to my mind, and I'm saying it as an historian, there is a correlation between populism, fanaticism, all varieties of fascism and so on, and incompetence. And we've already seen it. We are not even 100 days into Trump, I think. And we already can see it, and this is just the beginning. And this incompetence is at least, offers us a glimpse of hope that this is not a long-term project, although, you know, all these populist leaders think about themselves as long-term projects, and there's always a danger that, you know, if not enough good people would confront them, they can become much longer, have more longevity than we wish them to have. But even then, I think so. And that would impact Israel and Palestine, because I think in any, whether it's in the United States or in Europe, where we have seen the rise again of fascist nationalist parties, or some places in the Arab world and the global South, everywhere where these successes are now to be seen, yes, they are immunizing the Israeli actions on the ground. However, they are also characterized by incompetence, and they are precarious, and they are not stable, and there are forces that fight against them, who believe in justice.
Like ants in a colony, organize the wealth into a socialist economy, a way of life based off the common needs. And all my comrades is ready, we can spread the seed. And all my comrades is ready, we can spread the seed. And all my comrades is ready, we can spread the seed.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Subversive History. My name is Patrick, and this is my co-host, Johnny. Today, we are extremely grateful to be joined by Ilan Pappe. Ilan Pappe is known as one of the Israeli new historians who challenged the orthodox narrative surrounding the establishment of the State of Israel. Professor Pappe's work is an indispensable corrective to the distorted historical record that is maliciously weaponized to suppress the possibility of an authentic liberation for the people of Palestine. He's the author of numerous books, including The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, 10 Myths About Israel, and his newest release, Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic. Professor Pappe, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure to be with both of you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Johnny, would you like to say anything for our guests to get started?
I think that your work specifically, for anybody interested in educating themselves and understanding even the contemporary state that, like, you know, the Palestinian people face, right? Or for just understanding the history, you know, of the settler colonial project of Israel, your work is the starting point. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, right? A book that is actually very special to both Pat and I, because like we were, you know, right next to each other when, you know, we picked it up, right? It is near and dear to our hearts because I feel like I had a whole new understanding, right? A place to start from, right? That I feel like a lot of people don't have, right? That haven't read your work, right? Especially after the events of, you know, October 7th, right? And the ongoing genocide, right? I'm probably taking too long, but again, from the bottom of my heart, Professor, thank you so much for your work.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's very empowering and encouraging to receive such a beautiful feedback. Thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Professor Pappe, I'd like to begin this interview with a personal question before getting into the specifics of your work. As mentioned previously, you are considered one of Israel's new historians, which implies that you deviated significantly from the established doctrines of Zionism, often at extreme detriment to yourself, exposing yourself to character assassination, social and professional ostracization, and even death threats issued towards you. My question for you is, what experiences in your life motivated you to question the mainstream narratives and subsequently dedicate your life to correcting the historical myths of Zionism?
Yes, it's first of all, one has to say, when you are born into a very indoctrinated society, the way out of it is not in one go. It doesn't happen in one day, and there is no epiphany. There's no kind of, you know, a moment of revelation and then everything changes. It's a journey. It's a process. And it has stations like any journey. And those stations are probably the drivers more than anything else. I mean, I would like to think that some of it is connected to one's own moral constitution and so on. But I think it's also very much influenced by certain decisions that you take in life. So for me, for instance, the love for history was very important. And I knew from a very early age that I would like to devote my life to a professional career as an historian. And that meant that I was immediately exposed to the need to not to take for granted what you're being told, but the wish to examine yourself, the evidence, and see whether the narrative you were taught or were told about is really the correct one. So one driver is really love for history, and a very fortunate career where your own pursuit, your own hobby, so to speak, is also your profession, which I'm very lucky. Not many people have this luxury. Secondly, I decided to pursue the most important formative stage in becoming a professional historian, that is writing doctorate thesis. I decided to do it outside of Israel. And that helps because things you see from the outside, you don't see from the inside. And I was fortunate, and that was not entirely a choice, but I think I did want it, but I was lucky it could happen. I had an Arab supervisor. So I had a perspective that I would have never had I done my PhD studies in Israel itself. And being outside and I could encounter Palestinians on a much more equal footing than I would have done had I stayed in Israel. But I think that also there was some, and I know this is true for some other Israeli Jews who became anti-Zionist over the years. I think the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, it's very hard to see it as a justified war. The Palestinian uprising of 1987, these are events that make you think about the contemporary issues at the time and question the narrative that you hear in the media from your colleagues or from the politicians. And then you ask yourself, if this is questionable today, maybe it was also questionable in the past. So all of these, I think, were important stations. And there is a moment where you sort of cross the Rubicon. You cross the river, you don't look back, and you are at peace with yourself. You're sort of saying to yourself, okay, this is okay. No need to regret, no need to rethink, in the sense that you know that you are in the right direction.
So your book, 10 Myths About Israel, has a chapter titled The Gaza Mythologies, which challenges mainstream narratives regarding the history of the Strip. This book was published in 2017, and I felt it would be helpful to revisit some of the points you raised in that chapter to contextualize the current situation in Gaza. Firstly, I'd like to ask a broad question about the opening line to the chapter, in which you stated, "The issue of Palestine is closely associated in international public opinion with the Gaza Strip. This part of the region epitomized the Palestine question for the world at large." Considering everything that has developed since October 7th, would you say this assertion is even more relevant today than when you initially wrote it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that when I wrote it, it was half written also with wishful thinking, because I felt that in too many periods in history, the brave people of Gaza were forgotten, were marginalized, even among Palestinians. Not just among the world, and forgotten because of their geopolitical location and situation. But it was clear that the denial of Gaza and its centrality is the denial of Palestine as a whole, which is the main reason for the failure of the so-called peace process and is the main proof for the total misunderstanding, either intentional or genuine, misunderstanding by most people who have the power to change the reality on the ground. And I think what the 7th of October did, it brought back in a very painful way this truth to the center. And it's incredible. I think what I didn't realize in 2017, and I realized today, that Gaza is not just important for Palestine. It opened the whole question of what is international law, what is international justice, what is the complicity of the United States in the crimes of other people. It really opened up the whole question of the essence of politics beyond Palestine, I would say even beyond the global north. And that is something, of course, I couldn't see yet in 2017, and now I can see more clearly in the 2025.
If I could, I still think that since October 7th, right, and especially since like the rulings with the ICJ, right, and the developments with the ICC, I believe that there will be a period of history, right, where that is a demarcation of, you know, like the pre and post ruling, right, in terms of like geopolitical economy and geopolitical order, right, in history. I really do think that like it's kind of that, you know, one of those moments that people always debate, like when did World War I start or when did World War II start, in terms of like, you know, discussing whether it's, you know, events in Nanking or, you know, assassination of Franz Ferdinand. I really think that like October 7th is going to be one of those moments.
I do agree with you. I just think that we have to be patient, so to speak, about that. Because sometimes there are counter forces that obfuscate the picture. I mean, like the election of Trump or populist leaders in Europe, Modi in India and so on. They are not, in a way, challenge what you say, but they sort of de-accelerate the trajectory. And but I do think that in due course, I think it will be you're absolutely right. I think it would be a turning point, and it would actually, my sense is that we will look back at the year 2023. Unfortunately, I think it will include probably next year and the year after, but we will look at those 3 or 4 years or 5 years as the end of a period, not the beginning of a period, that opened the way for a new period. One that, of course, I wish for, but I also believe could unfold, which would be an antithesis to this period. And it will also be antithesis in Palestine, not just regionally and globally. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it was a very painful exposure of what is wrong in our world in many ways, and those of us who believe that one should rectify it and revolutionize it, and whatever way we are all thinking of doing it. Many of us, I think, were awakened by what happened there. Yeah, definitely.
In the answer that you gave to my previous question, you brought up how Gaza is not only just relevant to Palestine, but it's, you know, raises all these questions for the rest of the world. What is international law, et cetera, et cetera. I think another interesting question that it raises to the world is, what is terrorism? And that kind of is central to my next question. The first myth you challenge in the chapter is regarding Hamas's distinction as a terrorist group. You state that Hamas is branded as a terrorist organization, both in the media and in legislation. I will claim that it is a liberation movement, and a legitimate one at that. You wrote this statement in 2017, and obviously a lot has transpired since then. And this will be a somewhat controversial question, but do you still regard Hamas as a legitimate liberation movement as opposed to a terrorist organization? And if so, why?
Yes, I do think that definitely the level of brutality that the Hamas displayed on the 7th of October against citizens was terrifying, and I condemned it. I never tried in any way or form to justify it. But barbaric acts by states or by movements are not the only measure for asking whether a movement has the right to exist or doesn't have the right to exist. States committed worse crimes against other people, and we don't question their legitimacies.
Right.
And in fact, anti-colonialist movements have committed far worse crimes than the Hamas did on the 7th of October. And yet we try to have a moral context, and we know what we accept and what we don't accept. But as an academic who is an expert on the Palestinian liberation movement, it is very clear that, like most liberation movements in the Arab world, there was always a political Islamic group, faction, if you want, or stream, ideological stream, within all the liberation movements in the Arab world. Some of them used the guerrilla warfare, some of them won elections, some of them were part of a larger movement, but nobody questioned their organic connection to the liberation movement, whether it was in Algeria, Egypt, or Syria, or Iraq. So the same is true about Palestine. This is the Hamas and the political Islamic groups are part of the Palestinian national movement. In fact, every now and then there's an attempt to democratize the process by which the Palestinian people should decide which of the group is more popular or more attractive. Usually not so much, I think, on the basis of whether they agree with the ideology or not, but in view of the failure of the other factions. We've seen it, in fact, we are where we are in Gaza because in 2006, the Israelis and the West, for a moment, decided to allow some sort of a democratic process in the occupied parts of occupied Palestinian territories. And people voted in large number for the Hamas. So democratically, they were elected as the government of the day, mostly, I think, because of the very high disappointment by Palestinians from the Palestinian Authority, the secular forces, the left, and so on. In fact, had it been a normal reality, the political Islamic forces would have also disappointed probably the electorate, and the left and the center would have come back to power, as they do in certain historical situations. And of course, Israel did not accept this decision by the people and did all it could to punish them through the siege and blockade, and the rest is history, as we might say. So yes, in that respect, I think that one has to understand that this is a social movement, a political movement. It has a guerrilla side to it, what I said, just to be in line with the law in the country in which I teach in the UK, that, your secret service decided it's a terrorist organization. I cannot do much about it, and I understand it. I'm a lawful citizen, but I'm telling you,
as are we.
As are we.
as you are. And I said, I'm surprised that people like myself were never consulted by the MI5 or the MI6 or the British government to discuss whether the inclusion of that movement, and I'm talking about before the 7th of October, but even after the 7th of October, is the right thing to do. I don't think they ever had a serious discussion about it. They decided to accept the Israeli demand. I would have given them some lecture about the IRA and about the FLN and the ANC. Always can remind them that Margaret Thatcher called Nelson Mandela an arch-terrorist, and so on. But yes, this is a very difficult moment. I mean, and I have it a bit easier, I think, than some of the activists, because I really base my statements on my academic work. I'm really one of the world's experts on the Palestinian national movement. But of course, someone who's an activist and would say the same out of knowledge or less knowledge can get into trouble. And well, this is the world we live in. But definitely, I think we need a nuanced, informed view of what's happening, and not allow security services to be our filters through which we interpret reality or react to reality.
When referencing previous Israeli attacks on Gaza, such as Cast Lead and Protective Edge, in the chapter we're discussing, you assert that we must reject the description of Israeli actions as part of the war against terror or as a war of self-defense. Obviously, in regard to the current situation in Gaza, we have been inundated with the similar claims that Israel is fighting a self-defensive war against terrorism. Does your rejection of these descriptions still hold true when applied to the current conflict in Gaza?
Oh, definitely. I think the main factor by which you move away from maybe some agreement that initial Israeli actions are self-defense, for example, pushing out the Hamas and the Palestinian citizens that went into Israel, pushing them out of the country. You can see it as self-defense. Maybe some of the very early actions immediately after the 7th of October, 16 months into the genocide, you understand that this has nothing to do with self-defense. For two major reasons. One is that it became very clear, I think almost a month into the Israeli so-called retaliation to the events of the 7th of October, it became very clear that the Israeli political and military elite, with large support from the Israeli Jewish public, decided that the only response for what happened on the 7th of October is genociding the people of Gaza. So that by itself cannot be self-defense by any moral, legal, or commonsensical definition. So it became a punitive action. But I think about 5 or 6 months after, something else unfolded. That this is not just a punitive revenge action that turned into genocidal policy. This is now seen by very important elements in the Israeli political elite as a huge opportunity to wipe out the Palestinian as a whole, as a people, as a notion, as an idea, as history, as a geography. So it became kind of an elimination, a project of elimination that was beyond the genocide. It's kind of saying this is now the time to normalize the total disappearance of the Palestinian people, with the hope that some Arab countries would normalize this disappearance. Definitely having enough allies in the world who would go along with this. So this is not at all against terror or against self-defense. This is maybe the last attempt by the Zionist movement, which was a European settler movement that was supported by Europe in order to solve a European problem, the problem of anti-Semitism in Europe, by imposing a European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world at the expense of the indigenous people of Palestine. This is, and it didn't work. With all the power that we use, it didn't work. We are now at this moment where they believe maybe now is the last window of opportunity to do this. And the Hamas's brutality, as they would see it, on the 7th of October gives us the license to do it. I think Israelis are still surprised, really surprised, that most normal people around the world, even those who were shocked by what they know happened to Israelis on the 7th of October, do not accept this logic. I mean, really totally reject this logic that because of what happened on the 7th of October, you can genocide the people of Gaza, you can ethnically cleansing the people of the West Bank, and so on. But it's inbuilt into the Israeli propaganda, but it's more than propaganda. I think this is something that characterizes some of the most important ideological and political forces today in the Jewish society in Israel.
I'm reminded of I forget the term, it eludes me right now, but this sort of magical thinking, right? That even during the Middle Ages, that the European Crusaders had of like the idea of what the Holy Land was, of what Palestine was, and that like somewhere in Palestine there's like, you know, an Anglo looking person that like, you know, dresses the same way that Jesus did, you know, peace be upon him, that like, you know, that nothing has changed in the Holy Land since like, you know, the time of the Bible. And I think that like, you know, because of that sort of historical or cultural, just like that kind of world sort of illiteracy, right? We are like so blind to it, right? And if not blind to it, we have such a skewed and inaccurate, like, you know, idea of what the world is and what these parts of the world are in terms of like the Levant, Middle East, you name it, right? Outside of even within our own borders, that this sort of magical thinking, right, will often come to like, you know, these sort of ruptures, right? Like the events that have happened over the last 3 years where there's no kind of hiding it. There's no sort of like inbuilt excuse for it because it's just too much of a rupture.
Yeah, I think this imaginary kind of construct that you're talking about is particularly relevant to a very important, I would say, component or member of the global alliance that initially enabled the transformation of Palestine from being an Arab country into a Jewish state, and still a very important element in the alliance that today provides Israel in global immunity. And that is the Christian evangelical
Yes.
groups that very early on, in the early days of Zionism, and today, especially in the United States, but not only in the United States, many other parts in the global West, have seen Palestine as this land of Jesus, and that it is derelict, deserted, and that can only come into life again when the Jews will return to it as part of this, you know, divine scheme that includes the resurrection of the dead, the return
Red
of
heifers.
the Messiah, a conversion of the Jews as well, of course, to Christianity.
Of course.
And yet, I think this is, you're absolutely right. This is the empty land that was also a concept driving the colonization of the United States, Canada, Australia, and in those other historical and geographical case studies, because the reality is that the lands are not empty, it doesn't deter the settlers from making them empty.
Right.
To empty them in order kind of to solve this cognitive dissonance. We call Palestine an empty land, a land without people. We come to Palestine, it's full of people. So in order there will be no dissonance, we're creating the land by force. We create the land without people. And now you can some, not justified, of course, in any way, but you can understand it when you think about the ideological mentality, so to speak, of the late 19th century when Zionism appeared. It is quite incredible to see it at work in 2025. It's almost like, as one colleague of mine in the United States said, I think she was absolutely right. She said, it's probably the last living colonialist project that we still have. That's why we find it so difficult to find the words to describe it, because we're using a dictionary that really fits the late 19th century, but there's no other dictionary that would fit what is going on, because it is the continuation of the same perceptions, the same prejudices, the same racism that informs this horrific actions of mass destruction, dispossession, and oppression.
And what you just stated there, that's somewhat central to what you wrote in your contribution to the Israel and South Africa book that you edited, where you made like a broader comparison, not just to apartheid in South Africa, but you made a broader comparison of Zionism to how it embodies like more traditional forms of European colonialism, correct?
Absolutely, yes, definitely. It's very important to understand Zionism as part of this colonialist expansion of Europe in both its forms. There's a kind of the classical colonialist expansion, which is a bit older, and that's the colonial empires trying to expand all over the world for economic, strategic, and ideological, as well as religious reasons. And that's the role that Britain played in turning Palestine into what it became today. And the other form of colonialism, the settler colonialism, those European outcasts, like the Jews themselves, that Europe didn't want, that felt unwelcome in Europe. And really, in order to sometimes to survive or to have a better life, decided to create a Europe outside of the Europe that didn't want them. So they built new Europes. Not surprisingly, they use the word new for so many of the cities they built in North America. They really believe that they are entitled, because of what happened to them in Europe, to build a new Europe elsewhere, even if the only way of doing it is by eliminating native and indigenous population. So Zionism in that respect is not an exceptional case study. What is exceptional about Zionism, which is quite surprising, that even in 2025, places where knowledge is produced, where knowledge is distributed, shared, you can talk about the United States as established by settler colonialism. You can tell people in Mexico and Brazil that there were settler colonial movements everywhere in the world. You can talk about it. But when it comes to Palestine, you are immediately branded as a supporter of anti-Semitism and terrorism, when you're just saying, they're part of a global phenomenon that stretches beyond its historical period. In fact, I should say, and you learn all the time new things. What I learned in the last few years, especially from my students and colleagues, I think there's another place, by the way, that its connection to settler colonialism is totally denied, and this is Kashmir. And I think sometimes we totally forget to talk about Kashmir, but this is for another conversation, and not with me. I'm not an but I can definitely direct you to some very good people who can.
I would definitely appreciate that, Professor.
I think it's a worthy topic to talk about. Yeah.
You bring up the dynamic in which criticism of Israel, in the example that you brought up, label settler colonialism, or really any criticism of the Israeli project, is branded as anti-Semitic. And that segues us really cleanly into discussing your newest book, Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic. And to kind of start that discussion, I kind of wanted to give a personal anecdote that Johnny already alluded to at the beginning of this conversation. Some years ago, maybe 2018, 2019, I was with Johnny and we visited a bookstore in the city, and I was just developing my interest in politics and history. And I came across your book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, this copy that I have right here. And we were buying a couple books, and I picked this one up, and I was interested in learning about the Israel-Palestine conflict, but I looked over at Johnny and I was like, I'm not sure, this might be anti-Semitic. and at this point, I had no idea that you were Jewish or Israeli, for that matter. But I believe that my own cautious reaction to a book critical of Israel serves as a relevant jumping off point for our discussion, considering your most recent book does focus on the construction of this precise dynamic. Can you describe how this dynamic of conflating anti-Zionism or criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism developed?
Absolutely. I think that you have to remember that until, I would probably say, the end of the Second World War, there was no need for the Zionist movement to build a very strong moral case, a very strong moral case for the success of the project of the colonization of Palestine. What you needed is a powerful imperial ally on your side, and they had it. They had Britain there. Now, the world allegedly changed after the Second World War. Not only the world changed, also there was the genocide of the Jews in Europe. And it was very clear that here you have the conflict between two developments that one, the Zionist leadership felt served Zionism very well, and the other that really endangered at least its moral validity, that may have led to its collapse politically. The one that served it well, so they thought at least, was the fact that the world, and especially Europe and the West, were shocked by the genocide of the Jews, by the Holocaust. And what the Zionist leadership did very well is to convince the West that the compensation, not only for the genocide, but also to centuries of anti-Semitism, is an unconditional international support for the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine. In fact, if you read the United Nations Petition Resolution of 1947 and the press at the time and the speeches of politicians, it was very clear Europe and the West are supporting the idea of a Jewish state as a kind of panacea, as a compensation for the genocide. So that worked in a way. The problem was the other development, and the other development was the wish of at least some good people in the world to create a different world in which phenomena like Nazism and fascism, dictatorial regimes and so on would be at least condemned morally. So you had the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, you had the establishment of international tribunals like the International Court of Justice, and of course you had the creation of the United Nations. But more than that, this was the beginning of legitimizing the conversation about decolonization. It took a while. I mean, only in 1960, international tribunals were willing to regard colonialism as a violation of international law. But this was the trajectory. This was the direction of events. Now, looking at decolonization, looking at a world that wishes to protect human rights and civil rights, among them the right of self-determination, among them the right not to live under occupation and colonization, was something that the Palestinians should have benefited from, not the Israelis. And the more Israel became a fact, and the more it expanded its power, especially after June 1967, where it also not only expanded its territorial space, it expanded its control over millions of Palestinians in the most undemocratic way possible until today. Then there was a problem, there was a feeling among Israeli political elite that the first development, the kind of immunity that you get because you are the right answer to the Holocaust, is not working, especially when more and more people understand what you do, especially when the years go on and the oppression continues and becomes even fiercer and more brutal. And that's when you want to reawake the same sentiment that you were enjoying in the first 3 or 4 years after the Holocaust. And that's when they weaponize anti-Semitism in order to silence, ironically, a lot of people who were very much supportive of Israel or the idea of a Jewish state to begin with after 1945. So this is an attempt to send a message that only from an Israeli and pro-Israeli perspective can sound logical, which is because of the Holocaust or because of years of anti-Semitism in Europe, our colonization of Palestine, our oppression of the Palestinians should be considered moral. Or if you want, as they would put it in a different way, they would say, in order to rectify a huge injustice, you should tolerate a smaller injustice, so to speak. And this is where the weaponization comes from. That it's an inability to win the moral argument. You can't justify occupation. You cannot justify the daily abuses of the Palestinian civil and human rights that have been going on now for 57 years. You can't. So you're not getting into that kind of discussion. You are attacking those who mention these abuses rather than trying to challenge the condemnation itself.
So you wrote this book prior to the 2024 election, which ushered in the second presidential term of Donald Trump. You write that the Israel lobby might lose some of its support now that Donald Trump's term in office has come to an end, but he or Republicans like him can regain power. As you had hypothesized, Donald Trump did in fact return to power. So my question is, what are the implications of Trump's second term as not only it relates to the Israel lobby, but also to the progression of events in Gaza?
Yeah. Well, it's not that easy to say. I mean, the man is so whimsical and unpredictable that to venture a kind of a solid prediction here would be irresponsible. But I do think that I can see a difference here between short-term and long-term impact of the whole phenomenon of Trump, at least on the case of Israel and Palestine, probably with similar implications for a wider context. In the short term, it's a kind of a political development that gives the political forces who are now dominating Israeli politics, military strategies, and behavior towards the Palestinians, it gives them a sense that international condemnation, international law, all the kinds of things that they were weaponizing anti-Semitism again, as we talked in the previous question, are not important, because what is important that you have these populist leaders like him who totally agrees with them, uses the same language as they do, talks openly about ethnic cleansing without any inhibition, and is a bully like they are. So in the short term, you can already see that this is kind of unfortunately enhancing the determination of the present political forces in Israel to continue, unfortunately, with a project that definitely is not ending by what they do in Gaza, but will, at least they will try, hopefully they will not succeed, to implement similar projects of dispossession and worse in the West Bank, and maybe also towards the Palestinian minority inside Israel. So that's a kind of giving an impetus to very destructive ideological and fascist forces in Israel. But the thing in the long run, and that's not too long to my mind, and I'm saying it as an historian, there is a correlation between populism, fanaticism, all varieties of fascism and so on, and incompetence. And we've already seen it. We are not even 100 days into Trump, I think. And we already can see it, and this is just the beginning. And this incompetence is at least, offers us a glimpse of hope that this is not a long-term project, although, all these populist leaders think about themselves as long-term projects, and there's always a danger that, if not enough good people would confront them, they can become much longer, have more longevity than we wish them to have. But even then, I think so. And that would impact Israel and Palestine, because I think whether it's in the United States or in Europe, where We have seen the rise again of fascist nationalist parties, or some places in the Arab world and the global South. Everywhere where these successes are now to be seen, yes, they are immunizing the Israeli actions on the ground. However, they are also characterized by incompetence, and they are precarious, and they are not stable, and there are forces that fight against them, who believe in justice. And any small victory of fighting this populism, this fascism, this totally disregard for human and civil rights, wherever it is a win for the Palestinians. So I don't think anyone should be that cynical and say, you know, look at Trump, he might, which is true, by the way, he might think that the Iranians are his best buddies tomorrow, or whatever it is. And go against Israel. It is possible, but this is not the world. But this is not the world we want to live in. I mean, we don't want. It's quite possible, you know, that Trump would create this club of tyrants, and some of them, all of them, maybe economically or politically, would decide that supporting Israel at that given moment is not a good idea. That it's possible, it can happen with these people, but this is not what I'm talking about. I mean, this is not what it would have a positive impact. A positive impact would have a world where struggles for injustice and morality, even on a smaller scale, even with small achievements, is a world where Palestinians could hope for something much better than they are experiencing now. And everything would be better than what they are experiencing now. And hopefully, of course, in time, this would mature to something far more powerful in transforming the reality.
Your book also references a lobbying campaign which targeted BDS advocates and university students, I believe in Britain, which sought to frame advocates of Palestinian liberation as terrorist sympathizers. To quote your book, the program was called upon universities to monitor and refer students deemed at being risk of being radicalized. Waving the Palestinian flag was considered extreme, and students were cautioned as being extremists for displaying the flag or wearing the Palestinian keffiyeh. This dynamic you described seems as relevant as ever when applied to contemporary protest movements at American universities such as Columbia, and more specifically with the recent arrest and potential deportation of Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil. Can you describe how this lobbying campaign has evolved and how it is currently being weaponized against Palestine's advocates in the United States?
Yeah. Here it's very important to notice that the effort of the pro-Israeli lobby to criminalize anyone who criticizes Israel as a student or a faculty member in the academic world is old. They've tried to do it for many years. They succeed when actually there is a more general atmosphere among political elites that academic freedom is a nuisance. So it goes together, namely some of the forces in Britain and in the United States that are collaborating with the demands of the lobby to silence academics and students who talk openly about their support for the Palestinians and condemn the Israeli actions on the ground. Some of these forces have little interest in Israel itself. They have much more interest in shutting down any spaces that would question political elites, economic elites, and other parts of the establishment that would like to work in the dark or would like to work without any significant criticism. This is not only governments and secret services. There could be also multinational corporations that don't want to be confronted in a way. And again, this comes back to one of the first points that both of you made, that this whole issue of Gaza is not just about Palestine, and the way that people are silenced about Palestine or about Gaza is not just about that. It's about freedom of expression, academic freedom, and so on. it's really a very crucial moment because the Western political and financial elites want to have universities, and they want to be seen as cherishing principles of freedom of expression and so on, but within to a certain extent. It needs to be controlled. And of course, there is no such thing as controlling my right to express my views. And therefore, they find it more and more difficult to deal with it through, again, like Israel and the moral argument against those who condemn it. They don't find, and they can't find a proper legal way, a proper moral way to deal with very potent and valid moral criticism on their the essence of politics, the way they do economics, the way they do politics. So they're using force. You know, it always reminds me when I was beginning to be targeted by my university in Haifa, I was surprised by the sheer force my university used against me. And my one of my late colleagues, unfortunately she's not with us anymore, she said to me, why are you so surprised? I mean, these people are using F-16 in the West Bank. Do you think that they would have any inhibitions in using force against you? And I saw the connection. There is a connection, this idea that power and money is more important than your moral arguments. And if you think differently, we will teach you a lesson that this is the case. I think they're wrong. I think there are, I highlight in my own historical works periods where it was not possible to do it. And I'm sure that we will also continue to struggle to show them that this is not always possible.
So in your book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, you use excerpts from reports on the ethnic cleansing campaign that occurred in the Balkans in the 1990s to draw similarities between that event and those that occurred in Palestine in 1948. The Balkan example that you reference is also the only case in which the International Court of Justice found a nation guilty of the crime of genocide. Now, I know that you were using that as an illustration of ethnic cleansing in that book, but I'm curious, is there any inferences that we can draw from the Balkan example to make any kind of prediction about the current ICJ litigation about the crime of genocide perpetuated by Israel?
Definitely there is, because also in the case of the Balkans, ethnic cleansing deteriorated into genocide. What you had in ex-Yugoslavia is a wish by some ideological movements, by the way, not only on one side,
right,
to turn mixed ethnic areas into a pure ethnic area. And in all these cases there in the 1990s, as well as with the case of Israel, the preferred method is removal, whether by transferring people by force, ethnically cleansing them. And then when this project continues, the people who are victims of these displacements begin to resist. And resistance brings with it massacres. So at first, you talk about ethnic cleansing that includes massacre, but you don't talk about it as genocide. But the more the resistance is, and the longer the process of ethnic cleansing continues, the ethnic cleanser loses patience with the method, which is more incremental, more complicated, and definitely needs more time than with genocidal operations. So I think the world should be aware that the genocide in Gaza is a very alarming wake-up call to what can happen in the future, because as we have seen on the 7th of October, the resistance becomes more desperate, becomes more brutal, and the reaction to it would become more brutal. More brutal is a move from ethnic cleansing to genocide. There is not much room to speculate about anything else, very unfortunately.
So Just based off of that answer, do you believe, and I know, this might be out of your scope of expertise in terms of the legal aspects of it, but do you believe that Israel will be found guilty in the International Criminal Court for the crime of genocide?
It's a very good question. I think that the court would face huge political pressure,
Right.
not only from the United States, especially from Germany and other places. I think that it would find, I would call it an inventive way, which would be disappointing, don't misunderstand me, but it would find an inventive way because of what is going to happen in the next few months and year to say it is, but still leave kind of what they did before, an option for Israel to do certain things so that it's not a final verdict.
Right.
This is a tactic that means that we in the international court are also part of the power game, not only the game of justice. That's the bad news. The good news is I think that this particular inability to play the game that they think that they can, but they won't be able, would necessitate the international community as a whole to rethink what is international justice, what is international law. And this is not just about Palestine. Some of the biggest challenges that face our world, like global warming, poverty, migration, cannot be dealt by one country. In fact, we don't have a chance as human beings dealing with these issues unless there is a global cooperation. And global cooperation cannot be regulated without international law.
Right.
And therefore, there will be a need to rethink about it. Right now, millions and millions of people in the global south have very little confidence about the universality of the international legal system, given the way it provides exceptional immunity for Israel. So I think that this was something that would not satisfy those of us who would think that the ICJ and ICC did all they can to stop the actions. It would be the right move in the right direction, but it would not be enough. But I think it would trigger something far more fundamental in the long term.
Just, I know we only have a few more minutes here. Just one last question, and it kind of relates to that situation of like the status of Israel in terms of its moral standing on the world stage, and as well as with the broader standing of international law on the world stage. Your books make numerous references to that the Israeli state and those that lobby for it have had an increasingly difficult time sanitizing or justifying its egregious crimes against the Palestinians in the 21st century. And they risk losing their once indisputable moral standing in the Western world. When making this point, you highlight the violent acts conducted during Operation Cast Lead in 2008 and Operation Protective Edge in 2014. Considering the Palestinian death toll in these previous conflicts range between 1 and 3,000 casualties, how does this dynamic change given that right now the genocide in Gaza, we're seeing what could potentially be 10 cast leads?
Yeah. Well, I think we saw the difference, unfortunately, and this is one of the factors, in two ways. One is that the problem was not only the number of casualties. The problem was in the last 3 years, the war of Ukraine pushed aside the global interest in Palestine, and the 7th of October redirected the world into Gaza. That's one thing. So it was not just the number. The number did not only do this. Secondly, and that is very important, the number of people who, unfortunately in civil societies, not in political elites, that are now openly and actively support the Palestinians has never been so large as it has been in the last year and a half. So it had an immense impact on the magnitude and size of the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. And that needs to be exploited properly by the Palestinian National Movement itself, which is in disarray, and of course to see ways of how does this energy is being translated into policy, given that the political elites do not reflect this same sentiment.
Professor Pappe, I know with everything going on in the world, your time is so valuable and limited that I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We are a much smaller channel than most of the interviews that I see you regularly conduct. So I just want to thank from the bottom of my heart how grateful we are as fans of your work and as, running this channel, how deeply appreciative we are.
Thank you very much for both. Thank you for the time, and I wish you great success with this very important channel and the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So don't run around here trying to make friends with somebody who's depriving you of your rights. They're not your friends. No, they're your enemies. Don't treat them like that and fight them, and you'll get your freedom. My repertoire is USSR. PLO style, PLO style got thrown out the car. Rise for subversive bust. They'll call you an extremist or subversive or red radical. Rise for subversive bust. Red radical and fight them. Capitalism and democracy. Capitalism and democracy are not synonymous. We group us up like ants in a colony. Organize the wealth into a socialist economy. A way of life based off the common needs. And all my comrades is ready, we can spread the scene. And all my comrades is ready, we can spread the scene. And all my